Hello there, I'm Corel Painter Master Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'll be critiquing some digital artwork from one of my viewers. This is a drawing made by Anime Dragons. So I got a layer for notes here. I'll just go ahead and highlight a few areas that I feel could use some improvement. First of all, there's not a whole lot of variation in the line width. For example, this would be a line with varying line width. See how it kind of tapers off, and there's a variation from thick to thin. I don't see a whole lot of that going on here. Next would be this area here where you didn't paint in all the way and you can see through to the canvas, which you wouldn't normally notice unless you hid the transparency of the canvas or made it a different color. So for example, here I can make the canvas green underneath, and now you'll really see that unpainted area. So we'll want to fix that. Next, I think we should move the highlight away from the hair a little bit, because if the highlight's here on the eye, that means that the light is coming from this direction, and that would mean that if the hair is hanging over the eye, there'd be a little bit of shadow blocking the light. So that highlight should actually either be kind of cut off or moved over a little bit. Next, I think it might be nice to kind of taper some of the edges on some of the shapes. Like for instance, we could sharpen the eyelashes a little bit if we wanted to. We might also want to add some shadows from the hair onto the head, if the hair's covering up the head, and maybe on the body as well. And then the hair itself should have some midtones and highlights to make it kind of stand out and look a little more three-dimensional. And finally, we could add some shading to the eye to give it a little more depth, so we could have a darker color or a lighter color in there somewhere. So now that I've pointed out a few areas to edit, let's take a look at how to do that. So first of all, let's take a look at how to vary the line width a little bit. Since the version I'm working on is just a flattened copy, there's no layers with the line work separate and separate colors and all that, it's going to be a little different than how I would change it if I were working on one of my own pieces. So if we wanted to vary the line width, what we could do here is, since the background isn't very complex, we can actually use the background as kind of an eraser to kind of clean up some of these edges a little bit, maybe thin them out, so it's not a consistent line width everywhere. Really, the easier thing to do here, honestly, would probably be to redraw it a little bit and just try to draw your lines differently. But since I'm not sure which application you're using and which tools you're using, I'm going to show you this way first. This is doing two things. This is also kind of sharpening or tapering off the edges of shapes, as I mentioned we would do also. We'll go ahead and do that over here on the hair. Anywhere where the hair comes to a point, it's really nice to sharpen that area. And we could do this on the hair too. We could sample the hair color. We could clean that up a bit. Sharpen some of these inner lines as well. Let's go ahead and do it on the eyelashes here. We'll sharpen those up a bit. Let's clean up that unpainted area on the eye there just by drawing that in. And if you overpaint too much, you can always bring that blue back in. Let's go ahead and separate the hair from the highlight. We'll put the highlight in right here, so it's got a little bit of space between the highlight and the hair. If you wanted it to be a little more clear that this is a piece of hair here, you could also just extend it down a bit further and then bring in your dark color like that. That way it hangs down in front of the eye and over the hair, and you can see clearly that it's another piece of hair that's separate from this whole piece here. It wouldn't hurt to, in some places, also kind of overlap the hair a bit. That makes it look like this is a clear piece that's kind of coming down over the piece that's below it. Next, let's add the shadows on the head that are cast by the hair. Let's pick a slightly darker color here. Depends on how dark you want your shadows to be. And this is one of those places where it would be much easier if I had all the layers, or if the line work was separated onto layers, because then I wouldn't have to try so hard not to mess up my edge here. But essentially, all I'm trying to do is just create a bit of a cast shadow onto the face from the hair. So you're just kind of copying that same edge, you're just kind of moving it down a bit away from the hair. And we have a little bit of shadow there. We'll add in some here. Personally, I like to put everything on layers because I don't like to have to keep repainting things that I already painted. For instance, this line, I had to clean it up because I painted over it a little bit accidentally when I was putting in the shadow. Let's add some color to the eye. I'm going to sample the eye color, make it a bit darker, and shift the hue. And maybe we'll put in some kind of deeper area like this. Gives the eye a little dimensionality. I want to do basically the same thing on the hair as well. I want to lighten that a little bit. And then we'll add another lighter highlight in the center of some of these. You don't have to do them all. Maybe I'll just clean this one up a bit and make it a bit pointier. And there's really no right or wrong in art, so these are always suggestions. You definitely don't have to take my advice here. So that's about it for what I would add to this particular piece. Now, since this is kind of a short critique, I thought what I would do is I would just redraw this a little bit using layers just to show you how much easier it would be to make these changes. So I'm going to go ahead and dim the drawing here, and I'm just going to create a new layer above that. I'm going to use the scratchboard tool, which has a little bit of smoothing applied. And I'm going to show you what I was talking about earlier about doing tapered strokes and using your pen pressure on your tablet to your advantage. You want to make thicker and thinner lines by pressing down harder or lighter with the pen. Lighter is going to give you thinner strokes, pressing down harder is going to give you thicker strokes. So if you can do that tapered stroke, that's kind of what you want. It's going to give you that nice ink effect. Now, if you're having trouble getting that pen pressure, what you'll want to do is bring up your Wacom tablet properties, which can be found in your control panel. And if you look under tip feel, you can set this softer or firmer. I tend to press down really hard when I draw, so I set this a bit towards firm. If you press down lighter when you draw, you might want to set it towards soft. So experiment with that and see what works better. You can test your pressure here just by clicking on the little window. So if I press down lightly, I get a little pressure. If I press down hard, I get a lot of pressure. So then when I'm going through and inking this, each time I come to one of these points here, I'm trying to use lighter pressure. But you can see already what that's doing. And you'll notice I'm not trying to draw one long line through the whole thing too, because that's going to make the edges rounded and it's going to make my line a lot more wobbly and too thick. So I'm doing the lines in segments here, like this. And I'm not afraid to use my undos if I don't get the line exactly the way I want it. If it's hard for me to draw in one particular direction, I can try to draw the stroke from the opposite direction. And since these lines are on their own layer, I can clean them up, I can change them, I can do quite a bit with them. See, there's an example of how I started the stroke from the other direction and that worked better for me. Since I'm working on a Cintiq 24 HD, I'm drawing on a screen, and occasionally, depending on the angle that I'm drawing, my hand can actually block my view of what I'm doing. So sometimes for me, I have to draw from the other direction to even be able to see what I'm doing. Then we'll do the eye. I'm just going to draw on the oval shape, and then I'll kind of build the lashes off of that using a smaller brush. Now I can go in with my eraser and I can clean up anywhere where I over inked. I can clean up some of these edges to sharpen them off. I'm going to go ahead and name this layer ink. I'm going to create some layers below it for each layer of color. So I know I'm going to have the hair, I'm going to have the fur, I'm going to have the eye, and I'm going to have the background color. So we want to stack these from foreground to background, meaning that I want the eye to be above the fur, I want the hair to be above the eye, and I want the background to be the background layer. So let's go ahead and start with the eye. I'm going to bring back my reference image here, and I'm going to create a color palette. So I'll create one more layer and I'll call it palette. And I'm going to sample using Alt or Option these colors from my image, and I'm going to make sure that I use the scratchboard tool because it's an opaque brush to paint in my little blobs here. These are my little swatches. Then I can go ahead and just hide my reference image, and I can start painting. So let's do the hair first. I'm going to select that color from my palette holding Alt. I'm on the hair layer, and this might not be as easy as using the paint bucket. but it gives you a lot more control over the way that your artwork looks. You're not going to have to worry about any weird edges or having to separate your artwork from your paint later. So what I'm doing here is I'm painting right along the edge because that's the most important part to get correct. And then once I'm done with that, I'll use the paint bucket to fill in that shape. So for me, this is really the fastest way to fill in line art and have the most amount of control. So I'm going to hit K to switch to my paint bucket. Now I can fill in that nice solid shape. I'm going to go to the eye layer. I'm going to fill that in. The same way that I did before. I'm going to select this light gray color. I'm going to use this for the fur, and I'm just going to paint in all of the fur with that color for now, because since my background is white, I wouldn't be able to see white if I were painting. So I'd have to change the background color or change the color of my fill. And since I can easily change my fill, which I'll show you in a minute, it doesn't really matter what color I paint it in when I'm just filling it in. If I want the horse to be white later, I can change this from gray to white really easily. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to turn on Preserve Transparency, which is going to keep my paint within that area that I just painted. And if I select white, then I can go through and I can paint in some white here to change the color of it. If I turn off Preserve Transparency and I put in a background color, you'll be able to see that more clearly. We'll go back to the fur and turn Preserve Transparency back on. Go ahead and color my fur here near the face. If I need to go back to the shadow color, I can do that. I'm going to go to the eye layer. I'm going to keep Preserve Transparency on. That'll make it easier for me to go ahead and fill this in. But if you compare this to how I was trying to make these changes earlier, this is way easier. I'm going to put in my highlight on the eye right here. Then I'm going to go to the hair layer. I'm going to add some shading to that. Let's see, again, because this is on its own layer, I don't have to worry about painting on the background, and I don't have to worry about painting over my black lines that I put in here. So it's saving me quite a bit of time and a lot of frustration. Next, I'll put in a few highlights on the hair. And now let's take a look at how easy it is to change color. Let's say, for example, I don't want my eye to be blue. Rather than have to go in and repaint that eye, now what I can do is I can go to Effects, Tonal Control, Adjust Colors, and I could shift that color. If I wanted my eye to be lime green, I could go to my hair layer, I could go to Effects, Tonal Control, Adjust Colors, and if I wanted it to be darker, I could make it darker, or I could make it lighter. Now if you wanted to change the color, what you would need to do is right-click on the hair and choose Select Layer Content, or you could make a selection using something like the magic wand. Create a new layer, call it Hair Color, and you can set the composite method to a number of composite methods. Let's try Overlay first, and let's choose a color for the hair, maybe this hot pink. Let's go ahead and fill that selection. Let's hit Control D to deselect. Now we've got hot pink hair, and that color is on its own layer. And if you decide later that you don't want these two layers to be separate, you can go ahead and merge them together with Control E, or you can choose Collapse Layers. And now it's all one layer, and if you wanted to blend it or add to it, you can. Same goes for the background color. If we wanted to change that, since it's a solid color, that's pretty easy to change. I could just pick whatever color I want, hit Control F, and fill it with that color. So now let's take a look at the before and after. This is the before, and this is the after. Before, after. So you can see it makes quite a bit of a difference just using your pen pressure and varying your line width. I know there's a lot of people out there who draw with a mouse, and it's very difficult to get this effect with a mouse, so I would recommend, if possible, save up some money and buy a drawing tablet, because even a very simple, very basic, very affordable drawing tablet will be much better than a mouse. So there you go, that's my critique of Anime Dragon's artwork. Thank you, Anime, for letting me critique your work in a video. I hope these tips were helpful for you and everyone else who watched this. If you'd like to get your artwork critiqued in a video, send it to me at aaronrutten@gmail.com. If you can send me the layered version, that would be even better. You could send that in PSD or TIFF format. Or if you don't have the layered version, you can always send me a flattened copy. And make sure to include permission for me to use your artwork in a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.